I keep coming across the question, what comes next? What comes after my Cyprus setup? What should I do if I've maybe used the Cypriot setup for 3, 4, or 5 years now? And how can I further optimize or improve my tax situation now? Or someone says, I want a different place of residence. A few years in Cyprus were very, very good, but now I want to try something new, expand my setup. What you should do in this case, you'll find out in this video. Hello and welcome. This is Florian Wilk again, Managing Director of CMC in Larnaca and Paphos, Cyprus. And in this video, as I just hinted, it's about considering and looking at what you can do after having enjoyed the tax and lifestyle benefits of Cyprus for 3, 4, or 5 years, and where the journey could possibly take you next. I actually get this question from time to time, especially from clients who have already been here for a few years and whom we've been supporting for a while. Often they'll say, hey, now I want to move on to Canada or Paraguay or the USA or sometimes even the United Arab Emirates, or they're considering places like Malta or Portugal or other options. And my answer to that is actually very, very clear, because you really have to keep one thing in mind. Cyprus is an extremely attractive location, especially from a tax perspective and of course in terms of lifestyle as well. We are in the European Union, which offers certain advantages when it comes to exit taxation. It also offers advantages in that there is a double taxation agreement with Germany, with Austria, and with many, many other jurisdictions. The level of acceptance is also very, very high. That's why my suggestion is not to say, after 3, 4, or 5 years that I'll just move on and emigrate from Cyprus, but rather to consider whether, if it's more of a lifestyle decision and I want to leave the island, I can't simply keep my Cypriot setup. That means continuing to use the non-dom status, paying no taxes on capital income, and thus continuing to benefit from the low corporate tax rate between 2.5 and 12.5%. and simply relocating my residence, or rather moving my secondary residence abroad. In other words, continuing to meet the non-dom benefits, still spending the 60 days in Cyprus, which really isn't much. That's usually very, very easy to manage, to continue maintaining a residence in Cyprus. Then there are a few more things to consider regarding your main place of living. Of course, we have checklists that cover this, and then perhaps travel more or establish a second or even third residence. The only important thing here is, of course, that you must not spend 183 days anywhere else. This applies to almost all jurisdictions, because otherwise you trigger tax liability there and become taxable there instead of in Cyprus. That's usually not what you want, and this way you can continue to enjoy the tax benefits of Cyprus and still enjoy a certain change of residence. Of course, it depends on where you're going. Some countries are relatively strict and you can quickly become a tax resident there. Others are much, much more relaxed about it. So it always makes sense to get advice just to consider which countries you could go to. And what we also see very, very often, so as a rule I have to say, once you start enjoying the tax benefits of Cyprus, you want to keep them, and you should always remind yourself of the advantages you're really enjoying in Cyprus. As I just mentioned, I have the non-dom status, I have a very low corporate tax rate, and with the right structure, I can optimize things significantly. Most other countries are, of course, much less attractive in terms of taxes, so you generally don't want to change such a setup. But what we sometimes encounter, and this is another aspect, is when someone says, for example, that they're moving to Canada or to Italy, Spain, or somewhere like that, and will definitely be spending more than 183 days a year there, spend there, or rather have my main place of residence there, so I will become a tax resident there as a natural person, as a taxpayer. In that case, you might still be able to keep your company in Cyprus and simply continue to benefit from the tax advantages at the corporate level. You could even set up a trust on top of that to somewhat separate the ownership from yourself. However, this requires an individual structuring and again depends on where you are and in which country you want to become a resident. And then you have the possibility to continue benefiting from the tax advantages at the corporate level in Cyprus. This can go as low as 2.5% IP box taxation. But you can then change your tax residency on a personal level. It's important to keep in mind, which should really go without saying, but I always like to mention it anyway. Of course, it's important to note that while your main place of residence is in the new country, you shouldn't be remotely controlling the affairs of the company, so to speak. Otherwise, it's not unlikely that one day the local tax authorities will approach you and say, wait a minute, we want to treat the company in Cyprus as if it were registered in Spain, for example, because we believe that the effective management is actually in Spain. Just as an example. You have to be careful about that. So, of course, you need to appoint a local managing director in Cyprus and ensure that the key business decisions are actually and demonstrably made in Cyprus. At the end of the day, it's all about documentation, about being able to prove, even 5 or 6 years down the line, without any problems. The company was continuously managed from Cyprus. The key business decisions have always been made in Cyprus. So there is a certain amount of documentation required for that. But then you might even be able to leave Cyprus as your tax residence and still continue to benefit from the tax advantages at the corporate level. So let me summarize again. My advice is very, very clear. Consider whether you can keep the tax advantages of Cyprus, even if you might want to largely leave Cyprus, ideally, of course, keeping both the personal and corporate tax benefits. Or maybe there's also a way for you to move abroad yourself and simply keep your company in Cyprus. It's not entirely straightforward. You have to structure it very, very carefully and above all document everything. That's important. Of course, we're also happy to support you with such projects. And we have many partner law firms in a wide range of jurisdictions, whether that's in the USA, Malta, and so on. So in many, many locations where they can also support you locally. But I do hope that most people feel so comfortable in Cyprus that they'd like to stay on the island for more than just 3, 4, or 5 years, ideally 10, 15, or even 17 years at least for the non-dom status, and who knows, maybe even longer. There are even some significant proposals currently being considered for lawmakers suggesting that the non-dom status should possibly be extended, perhaps even indefinitely. That remains to be seen. It's not official yet, but who knows what the next year will bring. There will probably be some positive changes, which I think will make Cyprus even more attractive. And in this regard, the lawmakers in Cyprus are also very, very good at keeping the island permanently attractive from a tax perspective. Not just to attract investors and entrepreneurs once, but also to keep them in the country long term and convince them with lasting benefits. I hope this video has helped you a bit, especially if you find yourself in a similar situation and are considering moving on after a few years. I'm looking forward to your comments below the video. Maybe you have other ideas or suggestions about what can be done. Let's have a discussion about it. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you all the best. See you soon, yours Florian WG.